National Human Rights Dialogue on Democracy, Good Governance and Social Justice. Date 10:30 a.m. 14 September 2024. Human Rights Development Center HRDC organized a national human rights dialogue on democracy, good governance and social justice on 10:30 a.m. 14 September 2024 at Nasrul Hamid Auditorium of Dhaka Reporters Unity. Member of Bangladesh Bar Council and President of Supreme Court Lawyers Association, Barrister Mahboubuddin Khokon attended as the chief guest. Mrs. Katie Crook, Chief of Party from Counterpart International, Member Secretary of Amar Bangladesh Party, Mr. Mujibur Rahman Munju, joined as a special guest, and LIDO's Executive Director and Human Rights Activist Farhad Hussein, researcher and development activist, Mr. Aminur Rasul, and National Citizen Committee member Mr. Ariful Islam Adib attended as guest of honor. The dialogue, chaired by human rights activist and Secretary General Center for Human Rights Development, Mr. Mohammad Mahbubul Haq, and the program inauguration addressing and moderated by Mr. Rubaiyat Firdaus, Professor, Department of Mass Communication and Journalism, Dhaka University. The dialogue has organized in participation by 100 participants, including victims of torture and their family members, politicians, marginal group representatives, lawyers, human rights activists, and journalists from oppressed communities. Bangladesh recently experienced a student-led anti-dictator uprising and resulted in Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fleeing the country on August 5, 2024. The movement was initially sparked by university students demanding reforms to the quota system in civil service. Despite the government's subsequent reforms, the protest escalated into violence. Hasina's brutal crackdown and ensuing incidents resulted in nearly 1,000 deaths and 30,000 injuries. Violence, bloodshed, and vandalism continue even after the fall of the dictator. Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus assumed the role of chief advisor to the interim government on August 8. Barrister Mahboubuddin Khokon told that in last 15 years, civic space was facing repression in the authoritarian government of Bangladesh, in which there was no democratic values for societies and there was no democratic government in Bangladesh. Restrictions on access to freedom of assembly, association, or expression and access to information within civic space are significantly hindering society and human rights activities of Bangladesh. Peoples are living with restricted civic space in Bangladesh, representing the most severe level of restriction on civic reforms. Reduction and repression of civic space undermines the values of participation, solidarity, and freedom that are upheld by human rights, democracy, and social justice. The gross human rights violations, including torture, custodial torture, and death, unauthorized tear gas, and sound grenade, abduction, extrajudicial killings, harassment, surveillance, arbitrary arrest, and even enforced disappearances, endangering, endangering their right to be free from fear. These are the restrictions to freedoms of assembly, association, or expression. The National Human Rights Dialogue explored the causes and solutions for freedom crisis to make a roadmap for ensuring the democracy, good governance, and social justice. Thousands of people were killed by dictator government in last 15 years. We are committed to ensure the justice for all, in which everybody will enjoy their rights. Human rights activist Mr. Mohammad Mahbubul Haq that the dialogue created a sustainable solution to counter the restrictions through building a strong CSOS alliance where freedom, peace, democracy, good governance, social justice, and human rights are guaranteed by the state. Mr. Mahbubul Haq announced an alliance titled Civic Rights Alliance for promoting people's rights around the country in a context of gross human rights violations, including torture, enforced disappearances, and extrajudicial killings that continue to occur across the country with almost complete impunity. Despite international criticism and its own human rights commitments reiterated last November before the United Nations in Geneva, the Bangladeshi government further intensified the crackdown on dissenting voices in the run up to January's 2024 parliamentary elections. Around 25,000 opposition leaders and supporters were arbitrarily arrested and some were allegedly tortured and denied treatment. At least 50 have died by the custodial torture and organized violence after 28 October 2023. We are not aware of any independent investigations into these alleged violations. In this context, to establish and promote efficient governance systems under the Human Rights Development Center, HRDC, has mobilized the marginalized citizen to promote their human rights to build a roadmap for inclusive democracy. This roadmap reflects the victims and marginalized communities' demands and the commitments will be made by political parties, leaders. We called to interim government to reform the National Human Rights Commission to conduct the fact-finding mission in last 15 years human rights violation. Researcher and development activist Aminur Rasul said the country became independent after war. The leader did not want to know how the country became independent. They formed the government, they led the country, they came back to rule the dictatorship. The student movement taught us that now is the time for the complete formation of the country. So I want to say we must not step back without overthrowing this leader. And there is no chance. Mrs. Katie Crook, chief of party from Counterpart International, told that in the changing Bangladesh, we have to work together for development of Bangladesh. She shared her expression to the protesters who made the change of Bangladesh. Mr. Rubayat Firdaus, professor, Department of Mass Communication and Journalism, Dhaka University, told that it is rare in the history of the world that the Prime Minister of a country has decided to kill 400 people, have been blinded, some have lost one eye, some have lost both eyes permanently. 1,000 people have been permanently crippled. 74 children were killed. Arranging international justice by watching the audio and video. Arranging international justice by watching the audio video clips of the murders that have occurred. We do not want this autocrat to return or a new autocrat to take charge of the country. The student society of the country once again proved that no movement will fail if they wake up. In response to the ongoing situation, the HRDC urges the Bangladeshi interim government to immediately end the ill treatment of protesters and ensuring the social justice without torture, discrimination and restriction in Bangladesh. Conduct the independent and impartial investigations into all alleged human rights violations. Hold those responsible accountable and provide redress to victims. Dissolve the Rapid Action Battalion and investigate and prosecute alleged torture, extrajudicial killings, and enforced disappearances by its members. Meaningfully engage with the international community, including by implementing recommendations by the Committee Against Torture, the Universal Periodic Review, and UN independent experts. To compensate and rehabilitate the families of those killed in the anti-discrimination student movement and to provide global standard treatment and rehabilitation and compensation to the injured. By reforming the National Human Rights Commission in accordance with the national and international human rights institutions to determine the outline of fact findings mission and fair investigation of human rights violations in the last 15 years and to present accurate information for the establishment of justice and truth. Providing free legal assistance from the National Legal Aid budget to ensure justice. Making human rights education mandatory for democratic institutions and forces engaged in law and order in the interests of democracy, good governance, and social justice. Thank you for watching. Comment, share, and subscribe if you like.